Hello, and welcome to The Smiling Human, where collectively we evolve through inquiry. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Smiling Human podcast and another installation of Oak's Hour. Oak's Hour is a monologue series where I work to distill the interesting and meaningful facts of the 3 previous episodes. In this case, these episodes are with Tay Tayari, Zarin Beatty, and Alex King Harris. In today's episode, I'll be examining meaning making, presence practices, and the introduction of AI into wellness spaces. I hope you enjoy. To start off the show, I would like to examine exactly what meaning making is. I know I discussed it with Tay Tayari in episode 9, and we spoke about meaning both in episode 10 and 11 with Zarin and Alex, respectively. However, I want to start by investigating the question, what is the essence of meaning making, and how do emotions and thoughts shape the narratives of our lives? I conceptualize meaning making as the derivation of information, knowledge, or understanding from perceptual sense experience, as well as the compilation of that derived information into usable propositions that are carried forward through time. There's also something alive with equating and the inference of causal relationships. Something like word A means object A, and sensation B means phenomenon C. Something like this. Meaning making is inherited, it's autonomic, conditioned, and also volitional. Allow me to elaborate. It's autonomic in the sense that the nerves of our spinal cord can react before our mind can categorize. An example of this is pulling one's hand away from a hot stovetop before the mind can think the stove is on. The reactivity of our nervous system constitutes a form of meaning making as our body is deriving meaningful information through sense experience. Further, our visual centers are able to recognize patterns before the conscious mind can categorize as well. Think about walking along a path, maybe in dusk or at night, and mistaking a stick for a snake. You've startled and jumped back before you knew what you were seeing. These autonomic experiences and examples also constitute ways that our meaning making is inherited, as the capacity for our body to respond in such ways is a direct result of our evolutionary inheritance. Insofar as our faculties of meaning making are conditioned, we need only look to the consequences of chronically unmet needs during development or significant trauma to see a clear example. Depending on how our expressions are responded to during development, what we expect from the world, and thus how we interpret the happenings of our life, will take their specific shape. Many of the resulting physiological consequences of neglect, for example, are pre-linguistic felt impressions. These form the basis through which the other interpretive faculties of our nervous system operate, and thus shape language and the languaging aspect of our understanding of self and of the world. Our choice of language when it comes to how we conceptualize and articulate what the world is or what we are is comprised of axioms and propositions. These are sentences or statements that we accept with varying degrees of certainty. Those that are held with strong faith and support other beliefs, for our purposes, can be understood to be axiomatic. So, what we accept as truth for the most part exists within the domain of the will, the domain of choice. I'm reminded now of A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and the sense that one cannot choose what happens to them, but they can choose what they make of their circumstances and how they relate to the happenings of their life. Some choices can lead to great and enduring suffering for self and others, such as the choice to take the role of the perpetual victim, the cynic, or the nihilistic pessimist. So too can one find great liberation and empowerment by claiming the full volitional power of the meaning that we make. So, inherited, autonomic, conditioned, and volitional. Each of these elements constitutes, in part, our individual meaning-making apparatus. Whether or not they are recognized for what they are, the ancestral conditioned, and volitional aspects that form our capacity for understanding are inescapable. They're online all the time. If we are unaware of this apparatus or our natural proclivity and innate habit of meaning making, then the meaning we make will be shaped by unconscious forces and likely lead to false conclusions. For example, we might apply some understanding or conclusion derived from a particularly troubling circumstance of our past and use it to attempt to comprehend a situation we find ourselves in the present. We might do so reactively. This would lend itself only to further confusion as a result of the difference between what happened and what is happening. The greater that difference, the higher the chance that what you believe to be true is actually false, despite it potentially having been true and helpful when you first learned it in the past. So, most of us exist somewhere between perfected volitional meaning making and archaic and unconscious derivations. The quality of your life story and the quality of your emotional experience thereof will be indications of whereabouts on that spectrum you fall. Are you suffering the present, the past, the future? Do you feel grieved by what others have done long ago? Is life happening to you or for you? No matter where you are on this spectrum, if you're listening to this, then I imagine that you wish to improve your meaning making such that it minimizes your continued suffering. Assuming that to be the case, we can look at our next question. How does the practice of mindfulness, or how do presence practices, enhance our ability to discern the meaning that produces well-being in both our personal journeys as well as the narratives presented to us by society? Well, my first response to this inquiry is a question. Surprise, surprise. Where and when is meaning made? Well, all of the experiential input exists and is perceived in the present now. That information is translated and its patterns decoded in the present now. Our derivations for the best course of action that follow from the meaning made come forth in the present now. All aspects, both internal and external, to the experience of the meaning-making process inhabit the now. Thus, practices that deepen and cultivate present moment awareness will bring more consciousness and thus greater power and discernment into the place where it all happens. I've seen this to be particularly effective when exploring the conditional and volitional aspects of meaning-making. This is where notions such as self-reflection, undoing stories, self-authoring all come into the picture. The transformation within the volitional realm of meaning-making from unconscious to conscious takes place when the unconscious mechanisms are witnessed as a happening rather than inhabiting the role of truth. Let me put that simply. When we witness the mechanisms that generate false narratives, they shift from being the axiomatic foundation of our experience to something much smaller and much more manageable. They become a series of thoughts that can be seen and therefore changed. Our meaning making, at least that which is under our control, is comprised of thoughts, and all of these meaningful thoughts bring with them physical and often emotional sensations. We cannot control our emotions, per se, and nor should we endeavor to. However, we can control the stories that we write and believe, and thus the ones that generate and perpetuate our recurrent emotional patterns. Being that all of these, thoughts, emotions, and sensations, are rooted in the body, then embodied presence practices center our focus and, in fact, the lion's share of our potency as volitional beings in the very place where meaning pops into our perception. There's a balance to be found, then, between honoring the veracity of our emotions, sensations, and thoughts, that is, the fact that they are here and happening, and the humility necessary to doubt their contents, that which they propose or claim to be true about the world, such that we might succeed in weeding out the unhelpful and the untrue. When this balance is achieved, it opens up greater space for us to experience the world, to experience ourselves, and to experience others as they are, truly, beyond distorted and contrived lenses of meaning. If we have any hope of birthing such a balance, then our first step ought to be awakening and inhabiting our nervous system. That is to say, being here in the body. Have you heard of intellectualizing your emotions? It's very popular these days. It is a common and opposing habit to the one that we are speaking to, and is one that is a very prevalent impediment that I see in those who are on this path of conscious growth. A healthy body-based presence habit would be the one that looks to feel what is happening in the body and then use the language skills of the mind to describe it. Intellectualizing, on the other hand, seeks to explain and evaluate the whys and hows of the experience without ever slowing down long enough to experience the fullness of what is taking place. This intellectualizing is another way that meaning making, if not fully realized, can slow growth and perpetuate suffering. Feeling our body can be vulnerable and sometimes rather evocative or intense. And that's partly why it is so valuable. There is understanding to be found through the body, through vulnerability, and through challenge. As such, let's explore the ways in which the challenges we face, including vulnerability and adversity, act as catalysts for our growth and see how they contribute to the quality of the stories that we choose to tell. I originally tackled this question when it was brought to me by Tete Ari in episode 9. And if you haven't yet listened to that episode, go check it out after this one. I believe that we did a pretty good job touching on the relationship of these ideas, and I hope to flesh out that line of thought a little bit more fully here. So keeping our focus on the present moment for assessing this question, let's look at each piece in kind, starting with vulnerability. Vulnerability could be described as a state of being at risk of some degree of harm, and it's worthy of noting that feeling vulnerable and being vulnerable are distinct. They're not the same thing. We can feel vulnerable when there's actually no real threat in our environment. So this sense then of at-riskness or vulnerability is an output of meaning that is a derivation of threat detected onto our present circumstance. Adversity, next, is challenge, struggle, or opposition on one's path towards a goal or through life. Do note that those without any clearly defined aim can, by definition, face no adversity. Adversity is an impediment to progress. Progress requires aim and a target. It's only when one has a direction and is attempting to further themselves on that path that opposition can be met. This is because of a fundamental element of our human psychology. When we are oriented towards a particular end or have a particular goal in mind, everything that we encounter will be interpreted as either a tool that helps us get there or an impediment to our goal. Neutral or irrelevant variables are seldom given much attention. So this tool-problem binary is baked into the perceptual and interpretive aspects of our neurophysiology. Now, the validity and quality of our objective is irrelevant to the fact that its existence will give rise to the potential for adversity. I believe that much of human adversity, at least on the personal scale, is a result of our own ignorance. Ignorance insofar as we are chasing the unattainable, and we don't realize it, or chasing the less than worthy, and have ascribed it greater value than it actually contains. Furthermore, our ignorance plays out by means of misconstruing the attainment, that is, the getting of the thing, with the genuine value and well-being that we yearn for universally at the core of our being. That is to say, when I get this thing, I will be happy and fulfilled, and we mistake the thing for that feeling itself. Additionally, ignorance shows up beyond the selection of the goal. Let's assume that we picked a meaningful and worthwhile goal. Our ignorance then would show up in the fact that we haven't the faintest clue on how to achieve that end with any modicum of wise efficiency. But that is precisely the point. Confrontation with our own ignorance is an exceptionally potent nexus for growth. In fact, it might be the nexus for growth. But before moving any further, I think it's necessary to understand what I mean by growth. Growth is development and change for the better. This is often associated with an increase in size or larger enumeration, i.e., plants grow taller and my net worth grows daily. But where psychological maturation is concerned, I wouldn't say that the person gets any bigger. In fact, it's likely the opposite. I imagine that this type of development and maturation coincides with a shrinking of the egoic persona. And this is a topic big enough for its own episode. If you'd like to hear me speak on this, drop a comment below or send me a DM on Instagram. The details for that are in the show notes and video description. Now, back to the question. How is it that vulnerability and adversity can be catalysts for growth and shape the quality of the stories that we choose to tell? Well, risking vulnerability and coming away alive, in most cases, constitutes learning. And learning constitutes growth. Being vulnerable in our expressions can also facilitate the same kind of self-awareness that I alluded to earlier that's necessary for moving our unconscious meaning-making habits into the light of consciousness. Adversity educates us in much the same way as the challenges that we face, more often than not, demand solutions, and thus we, the one with that adversity, are confronted with the unknown and the weight of our own ignorance once again. I believe that it is wisdom that bridges these catalysts for growth and a change in story or meaning making. What do I mean by this? Well, wisdom in action can distill the most valuable lessons from adversity, and in so doing, we gain a new and a tested component that we can add to our meaning-making processes moving forward. To put it simply, when you make it through hard times, you learn to make it through similar, even more difficult times. And in large part, that's because the stupid parts of you that made it worse didn't survive. As the first half of our show sets in, I wanted to thank you for listening to the Smiling Human podcast. This show would not be possible without the support of listeners like you. Liking and following on YouTube, sharing with a friend, or following on your local podcast app are all easy and simple ways that you can support this show and help it grow into the future. If you do want to support this show directly, you can consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. Patreons get perks like early access to all episodes, behind-the-scenes content, and access to live Q&As with me. If this feels within your means, then please consider becoming a patron. Now let's get back to the show. At the risk of sounding overly reductive, the above premise is what underlies, albeit as an imposition, our punitive justice system. It imposes challenge, adversity, and vulnerability in the form of punishment as a corrective measure. In a backwards way, we might imagine that the system is set up on the premise that this adversity will work to rectify, by means of growth, the ignorance and dysfunction that led to the crime and to the imprisonment. This does not work, obviously. We see clearly that such unhuman or even anti-human systems tend to, in large part, generate repeat offenders. And yet, as we saw in episode 10 with Zarin Beatty, if you haven't listened, go check it out, that facilities like prisons or correctional centers do offer a unique environment that has the potential to be positively transformational if leveraged with wisdom. I believe that the stories that Zarin shared about the participants from the facility who went through his program during their stay point to a necessary human component in healing and in growth. Listening, reflecting, empathizing, that is, sharing another's meaning, are all pieces that shift the hearts and minds of individuals where bars and punishments couldn't. Note that this is not a condemnation or denial of the necessity of a justice system, nor a statement that these human elements work on all people. Psychopaths, sociopaths, and narcissists exist. I am well aware. This is simply a highlighting of what can turn adversity into growth. Leveraging these human tools are a core concept of counseling, of therapy, and of mentorship. And in case you were unaware, I offer mindful living and communication mentorships, and at the time of this recording, I have 3 spots left. If you'd like to chat to see if you and I would be a good fit for one another, there's a link in the description and in the show notes to my calendar. Go ahead and book. Speaking of counseling, therapy, and mentorship then, we can see them as areas of human technology that are currently facing an interesting crossroad. and I explored this topic with Alex King Harris in episode 11. When he and I spoke, we discussed how we might leverage these non-human technologies like AI and large language models for the same end as therapy, mentorship, and counseling, that is, the promotion of human well-being. Now, you might say that there's an element of our humanity inside these AI large language models as they take in and put out human language and ideas. At least it appears this way. In actuality, each letter, word, and sentence gets input as numbers and relative probabilities. The requisite equations needed to output coherent sentences are mathematic and coded. They are not linguistic. What we see then is, in large part, our language, which is the vehicle that we use to express most of our meaning making, can be understood mathematically. This means that we, as a species, exhibit behaviors that are patterned enough to be predictable with a high degree of accuracy. Now, this statement is not a slight on the uniqueness or the freedom of the human spirit, but rather a nod to the coherent and harmonious and even intelligible workings of the universe. And it means that there might actually be algorithmic solutions to human problems. I think that's pretty cool. By leveraging these pattern recognition capabilities inherent in artificial intelligence and combining them with the intention of living, caring, and empathetic humans, we might just expedite the rate at which we grow in self-awareness and develop on both the personal and cultural levels. This might be done through software opportunities like Evolve Well, which is the company that Alex co-founded, or by using ChatGPT on a personal level, like a sounding board for your struggles, or even a repository for those struggles, such that you could call forth meaningful patterns and solutions to your own unique issues. Of course, there are significant considerations that must be acknowledged at least and addressed at most before I personally would sign off on the widespread adoption of artificial intelligence technologies in the personal development and wellness spaces. Firstly, these technologies are owned by private companies and were not invented with the explicit purpose of ameliorating mental health or furthering psychological maturation. They're subject to change and to manipulation, which precludes them from being assumed to hold our highest good as their primary function or their primary application. Secondly, AI and large language models are non-corporeal. And as we've spoken to earlier, our body is our vehicle of perception and of meaning making. It's what makes us human. I would put forward then that this axis of commonality, corporealness, is functionally necessary for a genuine healing relationship to exist. That is to say that no healing relationship can take place if either party has no body. Co-regulation, this being the ability for nervous systems to synchronize into harmonious homeostasis, is impossible with a computer. Genuine affective empathy, feeling one's experience, is impossible for a computer. Both of these are essential elements to our growth and healing, as they are channels through which our being and body expects nourishment and connection to come. Nourishment being the satiation of needs. We are relational. We are social, and our needs are relational, and our body, our biology, has inherent expectancies that no computer could ever hope to fulfill. No matter how advanced this technology gets, we will always need one another. And as such, we must be keen-eyed and scrupulous with the rollout and application or adoption of such technologies into the realms of the human heart, psyche, and spirit. So, there are ethical considerations to be made as AI tech increasingly influences our personal and cultural narratives, and thus our meaning making. So what are these considerations? It's important that we re-acknowledge the scope of this question inside the context of the topic at hand. Meaning making is an innate and inescapable human endeavor necessary for our continued survival and evolution. Our meaning making can be hijacked by trauma, by media, by mass delusion psychosis, psyops, and other oddities of the human collective action. Thus, when we're considering the introduction of AI into therapeutic spaces or spaces that will directly influence the meaning made about self, about life or purpose, we must be conservative. Introducing such powerful information technologies without foresight could have devastating and irreparable effects on individual and collective cultural development. Why? Because these technologies are amoral. They do not answer to a conscience or to a culture that provides ethical guardrails rooted in humanness. Yes, the programmers are human and they take precaution, but how long until AI technologies are writing the code for other AI software? Without direct access to what generates our needs and brings us a genuinely fulfilling life, these technologies are likely innately incapable of the kind of complete support that many hope from them. Along this very same line, AI, ChatGPT specifically, lies. And it lies often, not simply as an error in output, such as seen when presented with the question, how many R's are in the word strawberry? For those who don't know, ChatGPT is unable to answer this question accurately as a result of the fact that it does not operate with words, but rather with numbers and probabilities. So it lies, and it lies as a function of its being, without remorse and without recourse. Yes, it does try to promote truth, but no amount of pre-programming precautions or prompts have, at least at the time of recording, been able to remedy this inherent lying habit. Why is this so alarming, particularly when considering the application of large language models in therapeutic spaces? Well, it's because the truth is curative. Yes, humans make errors, and yet we as a collective would be very quick to deride a therapist or a counseling psychologist who wantonly lied, was caught, showed zero remorse, and then did it again. That person would be seen unfit to serve. These technologies, although impressive, are unfit at serving us to the degree necessary to be trusted with the full care of an individual. I do believe that they work as powerful support tools in the hands of living humans that are working to aid clients and patients. But I can also see how cataloging the intimate inner workings of a patient's heart could lead a self-motivated actor to derive a course of action that would put the patient in an extremely vulnerable position, all as a result of the adoption of a large language model. Being that they are amoral, they have the power to help just as much as they have the power to harm. I've seen firsthand just how impressive these large language models can be when used in wellness spaces. This is because I've had the privilege of previewing and testing EvolveWell's software. When I speak to the potential harm, I'm not speaking specifically about EvolveWell technology, but I'm speaking to large language models more generally and AI's role in cultural development more broadly. There is one further consideration that I will note, and this is the potential for intellectual dependency. How many AI or GPT-generated emails, social media posts, or videos have you seen? It's more and more by the day. So what exactly is the risk of over-reliance if we introduce these technologies into more and more realms of human life? To be honest, I don't have a clear answer, but given our collective propensity to take shortcuts and to reach for the easiest and quickest gratification, I can see that some would forsake thinking for themselves as a first choice, instead seeking the wisdom of the all-knowing GPT. Perhaps my take is too skeptical. I speak from the vantage point and from the opinion that much of our current crises we face collectively has been born from the severing of our connection to our nature and to nature as a whole, from the forgetting or even banishing of these ancient and wise parts of us that modern society can't remember a use for, and yet they remain ever vital. I feel a fear in my heart that the widespread adoption of these non-human technologies will only take us one step further away from ourselves, from each other, our tribes, and our ways of knowing, and past the point where we might hope to rectify our blindness. To summarize then, meaning-making is the derivation of information, knowledge, and understanding from one's perceptual sense experience, and the compilation of that derived information into usable propositions carried through time. This process happens autonomically, unconsciously, and by choice, and is shaped by evolutionary, conditioned, and unconscious processes. Practicing presence-building techniques like meditation or mindfulness brings one's focus back to the point where all of the aforementioned factors coalesce into the experience of meaning. Furthermore, this recentering in the present serves as one means by which more of our conditioning that is shaping our meaning-making can be brought into the conscious awareness and thus back into the domain of will. Confronting these structures and rebuilding them through vulnerability, adversity, and challenge constitutes a powerful pathway of growth and transformation, and it requires a level of humility and self-reflection that can be developed over time. Presence and feeling-based practices mark the technology of ancient wisdom traditions and carry their aim as that of human evolution and growth. And now we have a new player on the field: artificial intelligence and large language models. These large language models can and are being used to generate profiles for therapy and counseling clients, to be used by those practitioners to better serve the goal of client and patient well-being. There are risks and there are benefits to this application, and I sincerely believe that nothing can replace the power of or need for authentic human connection. But I want to hear from you. What do you think about mindfulness in correctional facilities? How do you believe AI should be used in the human wellness space, if at all? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Smiling Human Podcast. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing on YouTube or giving a follow on your local podcast app. I know I said it in the mid-roll, but I'll say it again. If you'd like to support this show directly, you can do so at patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. You'll gain access to perks like early access to episodes, behind-the-scenes content, as well as access to live Q&As. Also, I've just produced an insight journal and I want to give it to you for free. You can find access to this month-long personal development journal in the link below. This is in the show notes or in the YouTube description. Also, if you feel inspired by the sharing that has taken place in conversations like this and you want to work with me directly, you can find a link to a free call below. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you again.